And we are live for our 11 a.m. session. Come, I see everybody, the attendees coming on in. And we're joined for a good morning from the Milwaukee Paracon Conference Director, Mr. T. Krulos. T, how you doing?
I'm good. Did we start though? It says start webinar in the corner.
Oh, no, we're going.
Okay, cool. Okay, good. Well, here we are, last day of this year's Milwaukee Paranormal Conference. Thanks everyone for joining us this weekend. So something I wanted to say that I didn't say in my opening remarks when we started the conference is, we did the conference this year totally free for anyone that wanted to sign up. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, we wanted to just keep this tradition going and celebrate all of this cool stuff over the weekend. But, the other reason is I know that it's a hard time for a lot of people. A lot of people have lost work or are not making as much money as they used to. So we wanted this to be a fun, free weekend for you and to check out some cool presentations. If you do want to support the Milwaukee Paranormal Conference, which is a question I've gotten a couple times, what I'm going to ask you to do this year is to support our wonderful guest speakers that we've had throughout the weekend. So if you really like to talk, some things you can do is a lot of our speakers have a book or a documentary. Buy copies of those books, buy the documentary, buy Sunspot CDs, or buy their songs online. Some of our speakers have made cool merch like t-shirts and stuff like that. Buy those shirts. Some speakers have a little donation thing on their Venmo or their Cash App. Tip them a few dollars if you like their presentation. If you're like, hey, T, I'm in a tight spot. I can't even afford to buy a book right now. I totally get that. I have been there in my life more than once. So something you can do that's free is a lot of our speakers have a YouTube channel. Subscribe to that. Follow them on social media. Share their stuff on your social media. Leave a nice comment or a private message that just says, hey, I appreciated seeing your talk. That really means a lot. I think I can speak for all the guests that we've had this weekend. It's really reassuring to get a nice message sometimes. So those are ways you can support all of our wonderful guests this weekend. Buy their stuff, share their social media to your friends. So with that message, let's keep it going. I'm very excited to see this presentation by Lisa and Mike, two wonderful tour guides and Milwaukee Paranormal Conference people that have supported the whole conference. So thanks for being here, and I'm gonna see myself out.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, T. Looking forward to hearing from you more at 3 p.m. T's going to be back up for the final presentation just to do some fun Milwaukee stories with everybody. All right. And so we should introduce ourselves, Lisa. I mean, you guys, if you've been watching the conference, you've seen probably too much of me. So you know who I am. I'm Mike from American Ghost Walks. I also perform in the band Sunspot. We played some songs for you guys on Friday night. And this is our Madison ghost host with the most. She joined American Ghost Walks in 2013. Yep. And so she's ran hundreds of haunted history tours through different locations and routes here in the capital city. So Lisa Van Buskirk, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long you've been in Madison and what attracted you to the dark side?
I like to say I was born on the dark side. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, and I was born on Devil's Night, which if you're from Michigan, it's the place where they burn down the whole city. But you'll be happy to know it's the day before Halloween. My mom was determined not to have a Halloween goblin, so I missed Halloween by like 7 minutes. However, I use my powers for good, not evil. In real life, as much as I love giving my tours, I am a City of Madison firefighter. which has allowed me a little different view on a lot of these buildings and some special access when we have fire inspections. So I was born into the dark side.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I went to the University of Wisconsin between 1995 and 1999, and I remember all of these different urban legends. And I remember people talking about Science Hall, people talking about Ghost Memorial Union, people talking about weird things happening at Picnic Point. And so Lisa and I developed a UW campus tour, was it 3 years ago? Something around there. Yeah. All the years start blending together after a little while. And so we've been leading it this year. We haven't had a real chance. We scheduled a couple of them, but people seemed kind of wary to be in the groups because of the latest COVID outbreak.
Mm-hmm.
And Shane, we do talk about Tunnel Bob. I've been in those steam tunnels, and so we'll bring that up a little bit later.
Yeah, that's coming up.
But the thing is that, okay, if we're not going to all get together and hang out on Bascom Hill, and I appreciate why people might be a little bit wary of that, let's do it together and online. And so here we are with a chance to do the virtual UW campus tour. And Lisa, if you want to kick it off.
I would love to. Thanks, Mike.
You bet.
Well, originally, this is kind of a special week for me. 25 years ago this week was when I started with the Madison Fire Department, exactly this week. And I think it's rather amusing at the times when Mike was being a very young, drunk, I'm not going to assume obnoxious college student. I was one of the firefighters downtown that probably had to reset the darn alarms that they kept pulling. So I think about that often when he talks about living in Celery or Ogg. What hall did you live in?
Oh, I lived in Celery for 2 years with Ben.
Yeah,
and Wendy, actually. We all lived in Celery for the second year. So
I grew to hate college students after about 4 years. But that's okay. I had a very good career. And a shout out to my friend Denise, who is watching right now. She is one of our administrators in the fire department. I like to say she runs it. She is the reason I am with Mike. One day we were out having a beverage and she talked about her haunted tour. And I said, oh my God, I want to do it. She looked at me and she's like, you should. They're looking for people. So thank you, Denise.
Yes, thank you, Denise. That was a very fruitful dinner you had. Because it turned out to be really great for the company, and I think for weirdness in Madison in general, I think we've been able to turn up the dial a couple of notches now in the city.
Yeah. Anyway, I would love to do the Madison UW tour. I was actually thinking it was going to work this year because I was betting they'd send the students home, but they didn't. They're still there. And I always get more and more information from my sources, I like to say. So we're going to do a little bit of a different tour and see how long it takes. And I got some interesting pictures and stories. And on the round, if you ask questions, I'll try to answer them when I can. So let's start out with the first slide of the beautiful Bascom Hill. Bascom Hill is one of the most, this is like the most beautiful, iconic college campus, especially with the leaves changing right now. This is not how it looks at the moment. There's going to be a picture of how it looks later. Now, Madison, or the capital, we'll start in the beginning. The college was part of our Constitution. In 1848, when we became a state, we were going to have a free university. It was pretty darn near free back then, believe it or not. So when James Doty bought the land that the university in the downtown sits on, he designed it specifically with the two hills, one being a Capitol Hill and one being a campus hill, a college hill, and that's the way it turned out since 1848. Now we're going to start where the campus originally started. That would be with North Hall. Let's go to the next one. North Hall right here is at the top of the hill on the right if you're looking hill in Old Abe. Now North Hall is super spooky, haunted. It's this really small, unassuming building, but they've had these great hauntings. One of the best stories was from a security guard that Mike knows. It was so funny when I got that text from him one night. So the security guard wrote that he worked there in the 80s. This was in the alumni magazine. And he had to make rounds, and at 3 in the morning, he was on the 4th floor one of the great big heavy exit doors opened and shut by itself. It could not have been blown shut. So he was just like freaking out. And then it got super, super cold, like freezer cold. So he ran out. And security guards are awesome, and they also tend to be a little tough, and I do love their stories. They have the best. He didn't exactly want to talk to his co-worker security guards about it, so he kind of mentioned it to the maintenance staff, and they're like, oh, you've seen our ghost. Excellent. The story with this particular one was in the 1950s, a professor was working in his office on the 4th floor. He had a heart attack and died one Saturday night. So after our guard went through after that, he would say, no worries, professor, just security. And he had no longer any spooky haunting problems. Mike, what was your teacher's name and what's your connection to this?
Well, it's funny. So we were looking through the alumni magazine for different ghost stories and just, collating them to get them together for the tour. I look and it says T. Sabatke. And I'm like, oh, I had a professor named Tom Sabatke. I wonder if they're similar. So I looked him up, found out that, yes, he was at UW in the 80s. And he's the guy that wrote the story. So my junior year American history teacher had, first of all, I didn't know he believes in ghosts, so that makes him cooler. But second of all, he had his own strange ghost experiences. And when he was talking to the people that worked there, they were like, oh, yeah, that's just a ghost that's there. And so it made me laugh a little bit to think that he he's like, oh my God, I saw a ghost. I can't believe it. He talks to the other people that work there and they're like, oh yeah, no problem. Which means I want to get a job in North Hall. And funny enough, Lisa, someone just posted this like 3 weeks ago, sent it to us through social media. And they said, oh, North Hall in Madison, I had the opportunity to visit the building's attic at night. My family came with me. It's the attic is a bunch of old and dusty rafters, a small area sectioned off with chicken wire, and everything's super quiet, super still, and it's ancient up there. He said up there with their flashlights, checking things out, they decide to have some fun, turn the lights off. As the lights go off, it's completely dark, and then wham! It sounds like something had fallen off the roof and like crashed against this, in the attic, and the lights come back on. When that happens, they run outside thinking that there was a tree that fell or something like that. But none of the surrounding trees, if you look at North Hall here, were tall enough to hit the roof. So they had a weird experience in the attic just a few months ago and shared it with us. And so I thought that was fun, Lisa, that you started with North Hall. And it's like, oh, I got a new story about North Hall. Yeah,
well, they say there's a ghost that either looks like a well-dressed janitor or someone from another time. Now, the one reason I did start with North Hall is the very first building in the university campus. It was built in 1850 and it housed 50 men. Not only that, it had all the lectures hall, it had the library, it had the laboratories, it had everything you needed, one-stop shopping. The only thing it didn't have were the bathrooms. They still had outhouses in the hill back then. And as those of us in Madison know, and a lot of the rest of the world, we take our Halloween very serious here, especially on campus. Back in the 1850s on Halloween, they were known to overturn their outhouses. So we go back hundreds of years for having the rockin' Halloween spot. One thing I also want to mention, one of our most famous residents of Muir Hall back in the day, or North Hall, was John Muir. He started here for a couple years, the father of conservation in our parks. He was sent off to the wilds and loved nature. So we have the woods behind him down the hill. If you could see that picture, is called Our Little Muir Woods. So the next thing I want to talk about is South Hall, which is a mirror image of North Hall on the other side. That's not it. So South Hall, I have some great sources, some retired Madison police officers that are security guards. One of them worked in North Hall, and he's like, yeah, it's super spooky. The other one said they were doing a ghost hunt a few years ago in South Hall, and his name is Mike, and as they're walking through, they heard someone call out Mike, and on their recordings or EVPs, they didn't even need a EVP, it was there. So South Hall, which is the opposite of that, is also very haunted. Okay, we'll go to the next one, which isn't, what's our next slide? All right, we were asked about Tunnel Bob, so we'll start here. This is the view from the top of Bascom Hill this week. They are tearing up all the tunnels and have been for 6 months now. There's like 20-foot pits. It's not the iconic thing, and it's fenced off because they are replacing all of the creepy old tunnels, which I hear look like the spaceship from Aliens. Mike, you were down there in college, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it is like it does feel like you're in the bowels of a ship when you're in the steam tunnels. There was a point, I believe you could get in, on Park Street.
You can get in so many places.
Right.
But it's a $249 ticket. Just
yes, don't do it. But there was like the lock was broken, and so you could, if you got into the manhole or whatever, you get down there on Park Street and Johnson, and then we were roaming around. Probably the weirdest thing I think we saw down there, besides it just I mean, this is the wintertime and it's super hot down there. And when they say steam tunnels, well, they mean it. The weirdest thing we saw, there was a sleeping bag with a dead rat right next to it.
Oh.
So it looked like somebody was sleeping down there and eating rats. And that was kind of like, okay, that's weird. But I don't think it's Tunnel Bob, though.
No, I got to tell you about Tunnel Bob. I've had some contact with him for my job. It's all been good. He's never been on a call or anything. He is he's 6'6". He's a very imposing figure, and he loves the tunnels. He doesn't talk much at all unless he probably has to. He's a very meek guy and stays away from people. But they couldn't really keep him out of the tunnels, so after a while they would just leave light bulbs out and say, when you see a light bulb, change it. There are stories that he lives there. I can honestly tell you he does not live there. I know that for a fact. He said he would never live there. It's super dangerous. He's even gotten steam burns down there.
Well, if he's a big guy, I mean, I can just imagine if you're a big dude, like I'm a small dude. And so down there, I felt cramped. If you're a foot taller than I am, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. There also is a good ghost story we got from down there. There was a group of college students being naughty. I've learned there are two types of college students. The ones like Mike that will run around the tunnels, and the goody-goodies that won't. But this one group was going down there, and they thought they were being followed by a guy. So there are twists and turns. So one of the party said, 3 of you go ahead, I'll wait. So he waited in the tunnel, and when this guy came around, he went to grab him, and his arms went right through air because there was nobody there. No one in the tunnel at all. It was a ghost, and that truly frightened him. So yeah, they're super creepy, but now, as you can see, the whole hill has been torn up for months. I bet they're going to be super modern, well-lit, and safer. That's sort of sad, isn't it? Takes away a good spooky thing.
It does, because the steam tunnels underneath, because like we got in by Park Street and we actually came out in North Hall. You know, in an actual, and then I was like, oh, we're in an actual building now. We better get out. We got to get out of here. But I know that people had been, you know, going down there regularly. Students did the exploring, and the thing is, if one of the pipes burst, I mean, the steam could be up to 430 degrees. I think they were saying.
That's bad.
Yeah, and that could burn you. And let's see, the fine is $213 for trespassing. So obviously, I didn't have $213 at a time, and so that's we don't encourage any kind of trespassing like that. But the steam tunnels are spooky. They do lead to all the different buildings underneath Bascom Hill. And sometimes there's people down there.
That's how they heat the campus. They have power plants, and that's how they heat the whole campus. Goes through everything. And actually, the Krampus that was on my tour last week, Dan, that you and me and T were talking about, he said he worked at the Capitol. He did something where he said he's walked from the Capitol all the way down to get ice cream.
Oh, wow.
On campus at Hill and all that. So they all connect. Yeah, I know. Anyway, let's move on a little bit here. What's next? There you go. All right, this is just a little quick thing, another shot of what our campus looks like right now. This is from Science Hall across the way. I did not get a picture of how deep this goes, but it's deep. This is Music Hall. In the beginning, when Music Hall was built, it is a theater. They do perform there. They wanted a place to fit all 431 students of the university at once. Can you believe that was all there was? And all theaters are haunted. Music Hall is no exception. It has its ghosts that turn on music, sort of make noises and scare you, but there's something very, very special and unique about this place. If you look up at the peak there, the Belfry, we'll call it, there are bats in the Belfry. So this is a severely historically preserved building, as the 5 original on Bascom Hill are. They cannot change it. They have this bat problem for centuries, and they wanted to fix it. They had this huge push, and they're like, they can't do it, historically protected. So there are historically protected bats in the Belfry in Music Hall. They've been also known to bother the performers during performance and a lot during rehearsal. One of my opera singer friends said that, you know, the soprano has her solo and then the bat came flying out in the thing. So someone in the audience just started screaming and sort of ruined the solo. But they were really bummed when they did the German, I'm not going to even say this right, the German opera, the bats made no appearances. So that's our little Music Hall thing. Okay, moving on. So next we are going to talk about Effigy Mounds, Native Americans, people that were here first, and a bit of a history lesson here. We found out when we were doing this, and I've been learning more and more about this, and it's fascinated me and kind of makes me feel bad after a while. In my colonial education, I thought that when the white people from Europe arrived here, it was one great big open field, maybe with a few Native Americans here and there, but that was not the case, unfortunately. There were a lot of Native Americans that lived in the Madison area and actually this whole country. They signed a treaty in 1832, which pretty much what started Madison. The Native Americans, indigenous people, were given the opportunity to leave or get killed. So they did pretty much leave. There was actually a law in the 1830s that you could not be in the city of Madison if you were a Native American. I'm not sure how well that was enforced because I do have some other stories. But anyway, let's get talking to our effigy mounds. The woodland people, yes, they do have such a rich history. Yes, thank you for the, I can't say the opera. I'm sorry, Veronica, good one, but I can't say the opera. Anyway, so for the effigy mounds, the woodland people had it, and Madison was probably the epicenter of where they were, and it spread out for 100 miles into the other states. Effigy mounds are burial mounds probably with 2 or more people in it, and they are sacred, which means they are holy, and kind of probably worship stuff happened on them. The one in the picture here is on Observatory Hill. So if you go up Bascom Hill, go back down, go up the next hill, look at that beautiful view of Picnic Point and turn around and cross the street. That's where this is. I actually did go take a picture of it the other day. If it's not outlined like that, you have a real hard time seeing it. So the white people, we destroyed 12 effigy mounds on the campus when we built the university. Now we're saving them. We probably have the most effigy mounds of any university in the world if we include the Arboretum, which is technically part of the campus, with 38. We have the largest winged effigy mound in the world on the north side of the lake by Central Wisconsin Center, 634-foot wingspan of a bird. So they are everywhere. And then just so you know, in the very beginning, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say there were a lot of Native American villages or residences from where the Edgewater is all the way around to Picnic Point, which is pretty much puts Bascom Hill kind of in the middle of it. Now, in addition to Bascom Hill having effigy mounds on it, it was the general Native American burial ground. Then let's move on to our next slide. All right. Before that, this is the view. So if we got this one right here, so we go to the next slide, which will be point 1. This is a view of Picnic Point. So if we're looking at Picnic Point, we turned around and crossed the street. That's where the effigy mound would be behind you and down. So all the Native Americans lived all the way around this beautiful view to Picnic Point. And we have a couple haunted Picnic Point stories for you, which is a generally absolutely gorgeous place. We are overlooking the Muir Woods right now of the Madison campus, just so you know, from that beautiful outlook. Anyway, Picnic Point is fabulous. It's gorgeous. It's very natural, and you pretty much have to walk out there. Only official cars are allowed out there. And there are a couple good stories. Our second Capitol, the architect of our second Capitol, August Kurtzbach, wound up looking at the Capitol from Picnic Point, which you can see, and walking into the lake to die. His story is he was the main architect of our second Capitol. He spent 6 years pouring his whole heart and soul into it. Then it was time to do the dome, and he had this perfectly cute dome that fits with his architecture. And of course, the governor and everyone said, oh, heck no, we need a big dome. So they kind of fired him. He got in a fight that they couldn't resolve, so he resigned, he left. They replaced him with someone who wrote a big dome. This absolutely crushed him and ruined him for life. After that, he got really depressed and really sick. He couldn't really hold down a job after a while. Moved out west, wound up coming back. And the story is one night he went out on Picnic Point where there's a fabulous view of the Capitol, looked at the second dome, decided that was just an abomination on his beautiful building, walked in the water and died. The thing that attributes them or him to this is sometimes they see like red lights come up out of the narrows there. Now, we're in no climate to have swamp gas, not even close. So they think that it's August coming up and his ghost lamenting his horrible second dome. But if it makes him feel any better, that Capitol burned down and we got a much better new one. You have to come on my other tour to hear all about that. The next story we have is about the witches. There's a really good witch story that witches haunt the Picnic Point. In fact, I even have a picture of witches haunting the Picnic Point coming up. Got the next one? See? Caught them in action. Do you know how hard that is to do? Actually, that's not hard at all. These are my friends from Fresco Opera. Usually every October they do a Witches on Picnic Point show. It's not your grandparents' opera. It's usually very creative. But the story with the witches said when the Native Americans lived here, 3 witches went by and kidnapped the children. So the Native Americans were all upset and they cursed all the witches. So there are witches who have their souls stuck on Picnic Point in trees. They made them be in the trees and they could never leave. So there's our Picnic Point witches story.
And then I think the idea is that sometimes if you hear a strange moaning or like voices in the trees at Picnic Point, those are supposedly the witches trying to escape the trees or trying to talk to you and tempt you in to help them escape the trees.
I wouldn't do that if I were you, though.
Yeah.
They're bad witches.
Right. They eat kids.
They do. They take all the kids. All right. Moving on, we have Bascom Hill. Now we're going to talk, well, should we talk about Bascom Hall or Bascom Hill first? Let's talk about Bascom Hall. This is an original picture of Main Hall, which is what the Bascom Hall was called for about 70 years when they built it. Just like James Doty planned, Main Hall on College Hill. You can tell this is very early because our friend Lincoln, Abe Lincoln, is not gracing it. As you see, it had a cute little dome. It's kind of not very symmetrical. I have a really good ghost story firsthand. I heard from a woman that had it here. I was hanging out in the Historical Society looking up stuff, as one does, and talking with the librarian there. And there was an older woman that was listening pretty intensely. And after a few days, I kind of got to know her. So she goes, okay, I have a story about Bascom Hall. She was a secretary there for a very long time. And she said one time she was walking down the stairs and there was a man walking up the stairs from a different time in a long coat, a long beard, and like a bowler hat. So we actually spent time looking for a picture of him. We didn't find him. And she thought that was super strange. She didn't tell anybody. A little bit later, like months later, she was walking down the same stairs with 2 of her male colleagues. She saw the same ghost walk up the stairs. So she stopped after the ghost went by, turned to her colleagues and said, "Did you see that?" And they're like, "See what?" So she was very interesting. So I, asked her, I'm like, "Do you see ghosts often?" And she sort of looked down and didn't say anything. And she said, "Well, we'll see." The project she was working on is she had stacks of really fine paper with great penmanship on it. And she was getting Civil War letters into her computer. So she's like, "Well, we'll see." So I really like that story. There's also a story that you can hear construction going on in the hall when nothing's happening. And one of the more corny, well, I won't call it corny. One of the more corny stories is when you walk on the floorboards and they creak, it's Chancellor Bascom being upset that people aren't doing their homework. They're out on the hill having fun or sledding. But I don't think Chancellor Bascom was all that uptight. There's another prankish Halloween story from North Hall. One night, remember the bathrooms were outside. One of the students was coming in from outside and he ran into a ghost in the hall in all white. So he ran and woke up his roommate and his roommate didn't see it. Two men go back to sleep in their beds and then they were waken up by a ghost in their room. This was in the student paper. So for the next week, this ghost was seen all over campus, which at that point was like North Hall, South Hall, Bascom Hall, and Music Hall. And it was causing such a frenzy that Chancellor Bascom had to have a ghost hunt. So he was assembling a faculty staff ghost hunt. And before they actually got to go do it, one of the students stepped forward and said, "It was me." In addition to bleaching his whites with unearthly glow, he also went on to become one of Madison or Wisconsin's most foremost Methodist ministers, Minister Trudeau. So that's a little fun thing about Bascom. So that's our little Bascom Hill story. So what prompted them to name it from Main Hall to Bascom Hall is it burned, at least the dome did. If you were to look at another picture there, the dome's not there and they balanced out the hall more. Okay, so that's our little Bascom Hill. What's our next slide is? Okay. Oh!
Lisa and Abe Lincoln. That's what the next slide is.
Yeah, I'm really good friends with Abe Lincoln. Me and Abe are really tight. We're very lucky we got that statue here. There's only 2 of them in the world. The original is in Hodgenville, Kentucky, where they wanted to honor their best son in 1909, 100 years after his birth. So they commissioned a statue. Richard Lloyd Wright, Frank Lloyd Wright's cousin, was the one who was in charge of getting the statue, and he was a UW alumni. When this happened, all the universities wanted one because of Abraham Lincoln. There was a Land Grant Act, and that actually enabled us to get almost all of our big old universities in the campus, but the only one that was allowed was our Abe. So he's very unique, and he's a very nice guy. As you can see, we're very close. Okay. Moving on. So now go back one. Okay, so the story about Abraham Lincoln is we did get him there. He was originally in the middle of the hill between North and South Hall. After the Bascom Main Hall burned down, he got moved up to his own terrace. While they were digging for the terrace, they came across some bones. So in the beginning, when Madison started in 1836 by King Street, the white people's cemetery was Bascom Hill. In 1848, they said, "We can't have a cemetery here. We got to build a college here. It is written." So they dug up pretty much everybody and moved him to a cemetery in Sun Prairie. So after that, they decided in 1919, when they were done with the new Bascom Hill, they named it Bascom after Chancellor Bascom, who probably did more than just a ghost hunt. And this is what they found one day while they were digging a trench. Next. They found the leg bones of white people. They could tell by buttons in the clothes. So what do you think they did once they found these leg bones of white people?
They give them to a dog?
They kept on working. Oh yeah, this was a cemetery at one point. This was a cemetery, we knew that, but we're just going to keep on working. And for years, I wondered why they kept on working. Then I kept looking into it. This was a Native American burial ground. All of Bascom Hill was. So I'm guessing every time when they were digging to build the hill, they kept finding bones all the time to the point where it wasn't a big deal. Because instead of saying, hey, maybe we can find more and do a little architectural thing like, we got to finish this trench and get going. We got to go home. Another thing about the bones being everywhere. Yeah, it is super bad to move a cemetery. For my job, I get to do a lot of building inspections and other structures. And I used to work on the south side. There's this new, well, a few years now, this fantastic bike path that goes from McFarland across the bay to downtown Madison just about. When I was walking along there at work, investigating it, with the people that actually built it, these guys were fantastic. They said the part in the lake, they drove the pylons down like they would, but when you get to the McFarland part, they're all placed on platforms. He said, yeah, we couldn't turn a shovel without running into bones, like nonchalantly, like it happened all the time. So they left them and respected them. So that just sort of blows my mind. They were just running over a cemetery with bones everywhere and didn't even think to stop. A few years later, they wanted to give Lincoln a better terrace. So 1922, 4 years later, they found the upper halves of these two guys. And they could tell who they were. They were William Nelson and Samuel Warren. Two men probably knew each other, lived in the same boarding house down on King Street. William Nelson was the first white person to die in Madison once it became Madison in 1836. William Nelson was from England, building the Capitol, and he got struck by lightning and unkilled in 1837. So now, if you didn't know about all the Native American bones that were on Bascom Hill, I would usually say, what do you think they did with the remains of these two guys? Anybody? Anybody? They put them right back in Bascom Hill. So I think it's the next slide we got there. So right here is a picture of where these two guys are. See the little corner, the little tag on the thing right there? It's a 2 by 3 foot marking that says SW and WN. One's there and one's right next to it. You can see we're on the right shoulder of Abe and we're looking at North Hall. So if you ever go to Bascom Hill, people are walking across a white person cemetery every day and they mostly don't know that. Kind of freaky, isn't it? Mm-hmm. This leads to another story about Abe. There was an Asian student, I think Taiwanese, and he had an American roommate. And his sister was up visiting and her English wasn't that great. So while the exchange foreign student was in class, he asked his roommate just to walk his sister around, show her the sights. And life seemed to be going along pretty well until they got to Abe Lincoln. And this young woman looked at Abe and freaked out. She made it very clear she needed to go now. So what they did is he hustled her home and thought it was really strange, huge language barrier. When the roommate got home, he explained that when she was looking at the Abraham Lincoln, two heads popped out. One was a younger man, one was an older man, ghostly heads, and they scared her. The roommate kind of thought this was BS until he looked into it, and the descriptions, an older gentleman and a younger gentleman, sort of fit our two guys that are buried in the hill right there. So maybe they're out walking around at night, scaring people. Wouldn't that be fun? But I really do love the view usually from that you can get. All right, where are we going next? This is a repeat of Music Hall. We do love our music hall. And once again, the not so great view. And a little side note, no, we're going to get to the spookiest place soon. A little side note, this summer we've had a lot of civil unrest, as we all know, in the world and in campus. And two of our statues on the square were torn down. And the next morning I went and mourned them because I do love my, they're good people. One was a Colonel Haig that fought for the Union against slavery, and Miss Forward. I loved her too. So I went up to check out Abe, and I'm like, man, they had, because right in front of Abe, there were these like 30-foot trenches that nobody could get through anyway. So he was feeling pretty secure this summer. Next, let's go to one of the most haunted buildings on campus. everybody thinks is haunted anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's one thunderstorm short of Frankenstein's castle, Science Hall, with its blood red bricks and its turrets. This is perhaps one of the most interesting buildings we have, even architecturally. The first Science Hall burned down, as many of the first buildings did, because they kept their firefighting equipment in their engine room or maintenance room. So the fire started there and they couldn't get it. While it was burning down back in the 1880s, the Madison Fire Department got word of it. And I love this part. And they ignored it because they thought it was a false alarm. Because those college kids way back then came up with a zillion false alarms every night that you just got so sick of going to. I think of you, Mike, in your damn dorm when I had to answer them all the time. So the Madison Fire Department did not respond in a timely manner. And by the time they got there, it was too late. And honestly, the building of that time, it would burn down anyway. So it's a fireproof building. It's a very large steel structure. It's probably the only one of this age in use today. It's fireproof because it's mostly masonry and metal. The only wood around it is for some of the flooring, the windows, and the doors. In the bottom of that brick building, the masonry is about 4 feet tall. At the very top of the 5th floor, it's still 2 feet tall. In the 1960s, they were having this huge revitalization of the campus, and they were talking about tearing down this incredibly spooky, awesome building. But they did a study and they found out to dismantle it and tear it down would cost way more money than to build a new one because it is so solid. Now, can you imagine hearses pulling into the back of this spooky thing? Because that's what happened back in the day. In 1905, they decided to put the medical school in Science Hall. And what do you need to study medicine more than dead bodies? So they converted the 4th attic. Let's move on for a second. They converted the 4th attic to a place where cadavers lived, and people dissected them at any hour of the day. All right, we're on the top floor of a brick building. Can you imagine what that was like in the summer, heat-wise and stench-wise? If you've ever been around those bodies, I'm sure they were preserved with formaldehyde. I would hope so anyway. But yeah, that's what happened on the 4th floor. They learned how to dissect the body and what was going on in humans. So it was kind of like a college campus. A bunch of men lived in a hall, right? Even if they were dead, a dorm of the dead. Another interesting thing about this building, if you look at the back, there used to be a fire escape. There isn't anymore. They used to set these cadavers on the fire escape when it was winter, like below 0, because they didn't have a lot of freezer capacity, to like freeze them solid because it was easier to slice through frozen people rather than not so frozen people. And honestly, they were more interested in the soft tissues than the bones, and the bones got cast everywhere. In fact, they were found for decades in all sorts of places in the building. In the 1970s, when they were doing a remodel, they found the legs of a tall man in the wall. Yeah. And then they were putting, this place where all the dead bodies are now, it's graduate assistant offices, just so you know. That's what moved there now. And when they were remodeling that, they found like the ankle of a guy. And then there was a story, the medical department moved out in the 1950s, and there was a fetus left on one of the sinks. And they're like, oh my God, a woman was murdered here. And it wasn't. There's no record of that anywhere. But in order to get these bodies back then, people didn't donate their bodies to science. They were at the mercy of the street people or indigenous that had no one to claim them. So the buildings, they would come in by hearse, they'd be taken up a pulley, and they'd be moved into the 4th or 5th floor. The next slide is the 5th floor. Check this picture out. This is like one of the things that just, I think, is totally freaky. Those are the rafters for the building. You're in the 5th floor. See that skeleton hanging there? That is a real live dead person, if there is such a thing. Check out his rib cage. It doesn't look like my nice plastic skeletons I have all over my house. It looks like the real skeletons I have over my house. Just kidding. But yeah, so this is where they would have lecture hall up in the 5th floor there. Super creepy, isn't it? I kind of like it. But that, as far as ghost stories go, they say somebody died when the fire happened. There's no record of that. But what there is a record of is on this floor, people walking around or something walking around, ghostly people walking around. And I can see that. You've had so many bodies go through there, that might happen. But I think one of the more amusing stories comes from one of the graduate students, and this is a story we read, is written, non-American from somewhere else, I don't know where, said he was given his office, the graduate assistant, and he went in and goes, I am not staying in this office. That is a drain. He goes, that's where the dead people went down. I do not fancy the spirits of the deceased coming up in my office. And he went on to become a professor at the university, but he went and shared his room with the dead. Not very becoming of him, I don't think. Okay, and what's the next one? Oh my God, okay, so we do have the most beautiful, iconic campus. This is a view of Grand Lakes University, which is actually the University of Wisconsin, and Science Hall in the background. Since we're talking about fun stories, I gotta tell you this one. In Science Hall, in one of the turrets, there used to be a courtyard where the parking lot is now. And they had a fire escape slide. It would drop you 50 feet in a spiral down to the parking lot, and you'd go bursting out, and it was fast. I've talked to 3 people who have seen that. 2 of them are older firefighters, Larry and Marcia, for my friends who may know that. And whenever they talk about when they were in school in the 1980s, they became proper fire escapes, but their eyes lit up like they used to sneak in there. You had swinging doors on the 3rd floor. You'd like grab something, kick it, pitch black. You'd go whipping around and come out in the courtyard. Everybody, all 3 people I know that saw that, even though they're a little more advanced in age, they are so excited to talk about it. So that was one cool thing. The other cool thing that happened is Grand Lakes University is from a fabulous cinematic work of art. Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield. Yes, it is a great movie in the 80s, and they did film almost all the outdoor sites in and around Madison. They actually did put that on the pedestrian bridge right there over Park Street while they filmed it. One of my friends is actually in the movie, Art Price, for the people that may know. At the time, he still is a very tall, dark and handsome man, very fit. He was a football player. So his instructions, he said, was just like to be background in Bascom Hall or on Bascom Hill while they were filming down there. So he said he kept walking back and forth and mugging it up for the camera, and he is actually in the movie. It's a really fascinating thing to watch now, especially if you're familiar with the university, to see how much things have changed. The student union looks totally different. The college club, Rodney Dangerfield sings in there, that's in there, and a lot of the neighborhood fraternity house type things. Art said that when they were doing that, they had to go to the church key to sign permission slips. He goes, there was not a whole lot of people attending classes that week when they were filming extras. So that's, is that everything?
Yeah, that's
Yep.
I was going to share a place that we don't have on the campus tour usually, I don't believe, but I wanted to share a story we just got from that somebody just sent in the other day as well. And that's at the Wisconsin Historical Society.
Oh, that is a creepy building.
That is a creepy building, right? And so let me just get a picture in here of it. But the the Wisconsin, it's a really cool building if you guys haven't been there, and it's a pretty fun place to go in and do research and everything. And let's grab it here. So this is right on Library Mall. Library Mall, in the fountain in front of the fountain is actually where we start the UW haunted tour. That's a great place to hang out. In my day, we used to play hacky sack there. I don't know if the kids still hack the sack like we did in the 90s. but used to hang out at Library Mall, sunbathe, a great place to meet people. And it's kind of, it's where State Street meets the campus. So it's kind of the mixture of regular Madison and student Madison, which is obviously they're different societies coexisting at the same time. So this story came in last week, actually. Okay. I see you're offering a UW-Madison Ghost Walk, and I want to share this with you. 1989, I was a security supervisor for a contract security firm when this company won the contract for security services at the Wisconsin State Historical Society. Our first day, a state employee janitorial supervisor told me I'd have a hard time keeping employees working nights because the building was haunted. I laughed at him, thinking it was a little weird, and I didn't believe in such a thing. I had to fill in on a few closing shifts there, and at closing time, we start shutting the lights off, making sure all the state employees and students have left the building. One night, as I was going through the floors on foot patrol, I walked into an area that held a small library and student study areas they could rent, and they were quiet rooms. As I walked into the small area, the door right behind me forcibly slammed shut, and I was terrified. There was no breeze, and the door normally stood open. There was no reason whatsoever for it to suddenly slam. This was the only way in and out of that room. I then had to go back through the door, as it's the only way out. While on foot patrol, I would occasionally hear a door shut and footsteps. I would go investigate and never find anyone in the building. One of our closing procedures, while on closing procedures and foot patrol, I always felt like I was being watched. The original part of the building was not accessible to the general public, just to employees. There's an elevator in this area that was very old. You had to pull the door open and slide a gate to get in. So it's kind of like the elevator you always see in old movies. As I started on foot patrol, this elevator was called to a different floor. I did a complete search of the building and there was no one inside. I took the same elevator back to the basement where I started, and almost immediately the elevator was called again to a different floor. Again, I searched the whole building with the same results. No one inside except me. I take the elevator to the basement. Then I decided to stay in the elevator to see if it was called. Within 1 minute, the elevator is called to another floor. The 4th floor elevator comes to a large room that always spooks me out whenever I had to go in it. I felt when I got in there like I was being watched by something. We had a security guard tour system where we had to check in certain areas to prove we made our rounds. One of the stations was in this room, and I always had an uneasy feeling in there because it was always dark. We weren't allowed to turn the lights on in the building because I didn't want students seeing the lights to think that they were open and they could come in. And so that when students think they can come in and do work when it was locked. So you had to make sure you bring a flashlight when you were on patrol. So that night, the elevator is going up to the 4th floor. It stops between the 3rd and floor, and it shakes, and then it goes back down. I push the 4th floor button with the same results. It gets between the 3rd and 4th floor. It shakes, and it goes back down. The elevator door had a small window so you could see how far you were into each floor, and I had to get out on the 3rd floor to walk the steps to go up there, and I felt uneasy going into that big room. So I assumed my foot patrol duties after again not finding anything. When I came back to the elevator, it again was on a different floor. So at the end of the night in the basement, we're required to close this big door right next to the binders that hold the old newspapers and this like 7-foot tall stack of newspapers and books right next to it. And this night, as I'm rolling the rolling doors and I'm shutting it down next to the stack, all of a sudden the 7-foot tall stack of newspapers falls on top of him, knocks him to the ground. He's covered in the binders of these newspapers, had to push him off, and he runs out of the building terrified. And then he quit his job.
Huh.
So that was his last day. So the guy told him when he got there that you're going to have trouble keeping employees working nights. And the guy's like, forget it. And he eventually quits because of too much paranormal activity happening at the Wisconsin Historical Society. So I had never, that guy just sent that story in either last week or the week before. And I love when we can be like, hey guys, we got a new story for you. Yeah. A personal experience that happened to somebody. And now I want to get a job working nights at the Wisconsin State Historical Society and patrol the 4th floor.
I know there are so many places I want to be a security guard at because they have the best stories. And I ask, I do get the stories, and sometimes like the Capitol, I want to get a job doing tours there because I keep going and asking. And evidently it's against the government policy to have ghosts in the Capitol. So of course they don't have any. I know they do. They're just not giving it up yet. I'm going to have to go undercover, be a tour guide for the Capitol. All right.
Do you guys have, we still have a few minutes. Do you guys have any questions about any particular places on campus that you're interested in, or things? Yeah. Or, you know, maybe places that when you were at the university or anything, you're like, oh my God, I always thought this building might be haunted or weird stuff might happen. Because, you know, it is a huge campus, number one. And there's some places we didn't talk about today that are on the tour.
A lot.
I mean, Memorial Union, Vilas Hall has a really cool story. Yeah. And so the university is, well, it's just a really fun place. And with 170 years of history now. You know, interestingly enough, there's a story about John Muir.
Yes.
That, you know, that I think is interesting. And he writes about it in his book that John Muir was on a hike, and this is nowhere near Wisconsin or anything like that. And John Muir is on a hike like in California. And he hears, he suddenly thinks of his days back at the University of Wisconsin. And he's talking about this in his book, that he's thinking about his days when he was in college. And he kind of feels compelled to go towards a certain, you know, a certain path on this trail where he hears a man screaming for help. And he goes, finds the man screaming for help, and finds out it's one of his old friends from the university.
Oh my God.
And so he had this, like, he had a premonition of, he's thinking about his time in Wisconsin. It leads him to go down a certain path where he finds he was able to help out one of his old friends who went to the university. And he writes about this in his book. And you're just like, you know, that's not necessarily a ghost story, but it's this kind of thing where something alerted him to it. And it represented itself as a, oh, remember college? That was fun, guys. You know, and he remembers college. He's walking along thinking about it. And then he finds his friend from college who needs his help at that certain time. So it's like the idea that the guy sending out this message of help, or this you know, he's sending something out psychically. It's picked up by somebody he knows and is able to help them. But the way it represents itself is through the University of Wisconsin. So once again, the Dairy State saves lives.
Yes. And there's more stories. So when we do get to actually do this in person, and you come see me hopefully next summer on the campus, you'll learn something else and have a few more things. Or if you want to come join me on a tour around King Street, I'm running them right now. And I have a good time when we get to get out and see some stuff, enjoy the fresh air and the ambiance of fall. And I have to say, fall in the Midwest is the best season. Right. It's the best time. Oh, somebody had a question. Wanted to hear the Vilas Hall story. Should we tell that one? Yep. Yep. The one about, oh yeah, the Vilas Hall story about the guy who ran the print shop. Yes. All right. So in Vilas Hall in the beginning, well, there was a janitor there. No, it was a janitor. What did he? Okay, there was a printer there back in the day when they had to print things up. There was an overnight printer that would print up the papers and what have you. And he was notorious for sneaking in at night, running that. And then he would cough while he opened a can. I'm sure it was just Coke. I cannot remember his name, but while he was doing that, he died. And then they moved to dot matrix printers, if you can remember this back in the day. And one day his initials, there you go. And one day his initials came printed out in like 1-foot letters, which was quite a feat back then to do that. So they knew it was him. Another interesting thing about this building, Vilas Hall, they set it backwards. The front is the back and the back is the front. The part you see from the street isn't supposed to be that way, I heard. Vilas is a communications building, so I had a lot of classes there. It's also, tell them about the director, that prank. Yeah, and so it also was it's the home of the Daily Cardinal, and so the printer that Lisa's talking about, he used to be the printer at the Daily Cardinal. His name was Orv, and it was the soda that he brought. The soda that he brought was he would get a takeout 6-pack from the Black Bear,
The Black Bear Lounge is a bar that no longer exists, and he would bring it in, and so pop the top, so people couldn't hear it, and so that's people. The kids that worked at the Daily Cardinal said that they could still hear Orv coughing even after he had died, and then mysteriously once on the printouts, they were having some issue with the printers and the dot matrix, and they couldn't figure it out until ORV was printed in X's, and they said that was their message from the other side at the Daily Cardinal. Funny story now.
Yes.
This goes, I used to work on a public access TV show with a guy in the 1990s, and he was a prankster. Like, he would always have these great pranking ideas. And so he ends up calling a construction office and says he wants to make a memorial wing addition to Vilas Hall. So he calls this construction company, and he names it after our our film professor, Nietzsche Keen, who's now passed away. She's gone. And Nietzsche was an Icelandic director. She made a movie called The Juniper Tree that was really popular. It was starring Bjork. And so that kind of launched their careers. And so then Nietzsche came to the United States and was a film professor at the UW in the late 80s and through the 90s. And so he's like, we're going to make the Nietzsche Keen Memorial Wing. Now, she's still alive at the time, right? So the memorial to who? And he calls the construction company, and he even sends them like plans for it and stuff. Enough so that, and I was wondering why construction workers were at Vilas Hall. I'm like, there's construction workers. They're starting to dig. They block off the area and everything. And then somebody from the university runs like, what are you doing? Why? Like, the earth movers are there to start building the Nietzsche Keen Memorial Wing to Vilas Hall. And I don't know if he had what he had forged in the paperwork or the phone calls or anything. But
there is so many steps to get a permit to do anything. I don't know how they fell for that.
Right. But yeah, the Nietzsche Keen Memorial Wing was just a ridiculous thing. So, the UW, I mean, it's always got a lot of fun mythology, urban myths, legends. And this is a sample of them. And we got more of them on the campus tour. And we'd love when everybody can get together in person sometime to do it again. So if everybody has any questions, we can take a couple minutes for those. Otherwise, our next presentation is 1 p.m. And that's going to be a screening of Return to Wildcat Mountain with Nathan Godfrey, filmmaker, who worked on a movie about mysterious big cats in Wisconsin. And so otherwise, if you have any questions or want to learn more things, if you want to find more about us, you can click on the sticky American Ghost Walks. Obviously, we're big supporters of the Milwaukee Paranormal Conference. Oh, yeah. And we're glad to be here. Okay. Oh, any stories about UW Milwaukee? Roz, make sure you come to the 3 p.m. presentation with T and Allison because Allison's a UWM graduate, and that's going to be more like where specific people can ask questions about Milwaukee, or maybe little known stories or places that are more out of the way in the Milwaukee area that we can't get to on tours because they're too far out of the way, or like there's not enough stuff close together to make it you'd have to have a bus. So we're going to be talking about that stuff at 3 p.m. So Roz, come back and you get some UW Milwaukee. You can ask that question there. And between T, Allison, we can see if we can find. Thank you, Lisa. It's always good to see you.
It's always good. Thank you for joining me. I had a really good time, and I have more stories. I hope to see you all in person because I think it's so much more fun.
Fantastic. Right. But it is fun. At least we had a chance to tell a couple of stories online today. Everybody, we will see you in an hour. And hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon. And also, it's a beautiful day. If you are in Madison and want to take a walk out later, we will be doing the 6 p.m. Madison Ghost Walk. Safe, socially distanced, and spooky along King Street tonight. So you can check that out there.
Yeah, it's awesome. Perfect weather.
All right, guys. We will see you all in a little bit.
All right, bye. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.